have shed light on how the assumptions and the foundations upon which the so-called Abraham Accords for peace have been problematic and have been fragile as well. The Abraham Accords and all the efforts for normalization have ignored the people of the regions and focus on forging peace deals or defense deals, as the controversial U.S.-Saudi Arabia defense deal that has been in discussions over the past weeks. And this has been such a short-sighted view that thinking that you could have, first of all, a defense or normalization deal with leaders who are not going to be authoritarian and not representing the public, and expect that this would be sustained and could be stable. Now, the events of the past 7 days have shown that this is not possible because the situation is unfair. Then the deals themselves have been forged on terms that were not giving justice to Palestinians, basically giving crumbs to the Palestinians while focusing on arms deals between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. All this combined is contributing to the very well understanding that everyone is now hopefully aware of, that you cannot forge such deals or agreements for normalization with, I would say, not just authoritarian views, but I'd say individuals. And this is the Crown Prince of Mohammed bin Salman. You are forging a deal with an individual, not a country, and not with an agreement or the approval of the people. The reason why most Arab leaders right now are into negotiations and showing support for Saudi Arabia, showing support for Palestine, is of course for Palestine, but also for their own stability, because they are very well aware that as the situation continues, as we see the videos emerging of Gazans being bombed, even when they're trying to follow the rules and evacuate, this would not sit in well with the public. There will be protests, and they are not ready to face this. And that's why they are trying hard right now to play an effective role.
Yara, if I could ask you about what is the final leg of the trip, which is to Egypt. In many ways, Egypt is the most important because many describe Gaza as the largest open-air prison in the world, and if Israel is the jailer, then Egypt also has a key to that prison. There have been suggestions, I wonder if you heard these, from some in Israeli political circles, that the ultimate aim is to remove all the citizens of Gaza and send them to the Sinai and get them out of Gaza. Is that something that Palestinians are really concerned about at this stage?
Yes, I think so. And that's why I kept using the term ethnic cleansing, because I don't think it will stop with the bombardment. I think the ultimate goal is to push Palestinians out of Gaza, or even to cut Gaza in half so it's an even smaller space. And we've heard Israeli officials talking about wanting to pressure Egypt into opening the crossing to allow Palestinians to go into the Sinai Peninsula. And they've even described setting up a tent city. This amounts to, obviously, a war crime. It's the forced displacement of an entire population of people that are already refugees, several generations in. And that's why we're seeing messages and social media posts from people in Gaza saying that they will not leave their homes because they know that leaving their homes will probably mean that they will be exiled permanently from them. So I think it's very clear that we are seeing the Israeli regime attempting to garner support for this plan. They will call it, of course, a temporary rehousing or a temporary moving of people for their safety. But the reality, and you don't have to take my word for it, we have 7 decades of Israeli regime consistently denying Palestinian refugees the right to return home as proof of their intentions. But I do think it will be a hard sell to the Egyptian regime. The Egyptian regime certainly does not want any Palestinian refugees, let alone millions of them, within their borders. And so I think that if they will go through with this, the US will have to come up with a big prize for the Egyptian regime for them to open their borders.
Let me bring in Nancy on that. How destabilising could it be for Egypt if there were not necessarily all of the people in Gaza, but a lot of people in Gaza came into Egypt? Because President Sisi is not all that strong, is he?
Well, this would be highly destabilizing, and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is well aware of that. But before we talk about how destabilizing this would be for Egypt, we also need to, and I just want to underscore what Yara said, that the displacement and exporting the problem to Egypt has been in the plans and the works, and they try to do that. I mean, the Israelis, and back before the Biden administration, Kushner and Trump has tried to do that, and trying to move the Palestinians to Sinai, thinking if they throw money over the issue and bribe the Egyptian government, that would work. And of course, again, this is the same false assumptions upon which the Abraham Accords have been founded. Now, I think President Sisi, surprisingly, have been really are clear about national security in Egypt. So he had measured and wise responses. I mean, I think just a few hours ago, there were news that, yes, I mean, Egypt would support the American nationals who are in Gaza to cross Rafah. However, he made a clear condition that this would only be possible if you allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. I mean, like,
okay,
this is,
I want to bring Rich in on that. I want to bring Rich in on that, Nancy. There is this deal, it seems, for US nationals and other dual nationals. We think there are about 500 to 600 US citizens in Gaza, for them to leave, leaving behind, of course, the other 2.4 million Gazans who were there under siege with no power and no water. At the end of this trip, if that is achieved by Secretary of State Blinken, will he see that as a success?
Well, yes, it's the first responsibility of any state to protect its citizens, and that goes for the United States as well as it goes for Israel and for Egypt, who we've just been discussing. In comparison with the 2006 war, for instance, in which there was an extensive bombing of Lebanon by the Israeli Air Force after Hezbollah abducted Israelis and attacked northern Israel, there was an extensive tens of thousands of U.S. citizens were evacuated from Lebanon. So it would not be unusual, nor would it be as onerous a task in logistics terms to move 500 or 600 people. Now, the other thing I want to bring up is that I have a very different interpretation of what Israel's been trying to do prior to this attack. I don't believe the story that they've been trying to move the Gaza Palestinians out into Sinai. As a matter of fact, the Israelis have tried the exact opposite. Their approach, and one of the reasons they were caught off guard by Hamas's attack, is because they have been banking on the quiescence of the Palestinians in Gaza based on increased living standards. And to that end, they've issued, over the last 2 to 3 years, a greatly increased number of work permits. So we had Gaza Palestinians who had for long not been able to cross into Israel proper, coming to work in agricultural and industrial enterprises. So the Israelis actually thought that this was going to result in a decrease of tensions because the Palestinians could stay and live in Gaza decently and come to work in Israel. This was an economic peace.
Rich, we're going to thank you very much. We've come to the end of our time. Thank you very much to all of our panel of guests, Yara Hawari, Rich Outzen and Nancy O'Kale. If you joined us late, you can see all of this show again anytime on the website, aljazeera.com. Al Jazeera continues its comprehensive coverage of the Gaza war 24 hours a day. If you'd like to give us your thoughts on the situation, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We're also on X, Twitter still to many of us, and we are at AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and the team, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.
Respected journalism.
This street in central Kharkiv shows you how devastating the effect of Russian bombing has been.
I can see where 2 of the bullets hit. They're about my head height.
Memorable documentaries.
The military wanted him dead.
There are still men who believe women are a property.
Unequaled broadcasting. Al Jazeera English, proud recipient of the New York Festival's Broadcaster of the Year award for the 7th year running.
AI is the media's secret weapon, revolutionizing how we create and consume information. But was this script created by AI? Can you even tell? And how much does it matter? The Listening Post, your guide to the media.
The sudden surge in boats has put Lampedusa not for the first time in the crosshairs of European political debate. What's not up for argument, this tiny island can't cope. For most, nights here are spent in the open, days seeking whatever help there is.
3 good days I haven't eaten, and I've seen some people, 4 good days, they haven't eaten anything.
Lampedusa is less than 150 kilometers from the Tunisian coast and has become the main sea route from North Africa into Europe. Free Lampedusa, shouts the island's deputy mayor, saying the residents are tired and want to return to a life based on tourism and fishing.
Ursula von der Leyen will be here on Sunday along with Giorgia Meloni, but it's far from clear exactly how much of what she wants Italy's Prime Minister will get. One demand almost certainly well out of reach, the idea of an EU naval blockade that would prevent migrant boats from reaching these shores.
"300 Palestinians in Gaza are killed by Israeli airstrikes in the last 24 hours, mostly women and children." I'm Kerry Johnston. This is Al Jazeera. We're live from Doha. Also coming up, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians seek shelter in the south ahead of an expected Israeli ground invasion. Israel's Prime Minister visits troops near the frontier with Gaza as the military build-up grows. And tens of thousands join protests around the world as the war triggers passions on both sides. Israel's military says it's preparing to carry out a wide-range offensive of Gaza by air, land and sea. More than 1 million Palestinians have been ordered to leave their neighborhoods and flee south. At least 2,200 Palestinians have been killed since Saturday. 724 of them were children. The Israeli military's continuous airstrikes have leveled homes and neighborhoods. The UN's aid chief says the humanitarian situation is fast becoming untenable. Water has now run out for 2 million people in Gaza after Israel imposed its total blockade. Tarek Abu-Azzoum has more from a hospital in Gaza.
I'm standing inside the Nasser hospital inside the Gaza Strip. As you can now clearly see right now in the front of you that the medical staffs are just racing the time in order to provide medical treatment for hundreds and thousands of Palestinians who really were bombarded by the Israeli occupation forces since the early outbreak of the current wave of escalation between Palestinian fighters and the Israeli occupation forces. Now, these medical staffs are working despite the intensive rhythm of responsibilities and even restrictions that had been imposed by the Israeli occupation forces. As you can see, beds are really prepared to receive victims, receive injured people. Like we are told talking about a very minimum capacity of medical equipment that cannot be really enough for providing treatment for injured people inside the besieged enclave. In fact, the restrictions that had been imposed by the Israeli occupation forces during the early beginning of this conflict related to the panning and the deprivation of entry of medical supplies to the medical sector inside the Gaza Strip. We're talking about 9 parts of 9 Palestinian hospitals were bombarded by the Israeli occupation forces. Also, different pharmaceutical warehouses were destroyed by Israeli airstrikes. We're talking about 4 Palestinian hospitals were threatened with evacuation in the northern and central areas of the Gaza Strip. Now, the Palestinian Ministry of Health inside the besieged enclave had delivered different demands and calls for the international community and even for international powers to afford a humanitarian corridor for Palestinians to provide them with humanitarian aid and even to provide the medical sector with different kind of medical items and necessary medical drugs in order to help Palestinians and to provide treatment for injured people, as water has run out of from the Gaza Strip. Also, the fuel has been also run out from the only solar power plant station inside the Gaza Strip. These kind of restrictions and these kinds of obstacles that Palestinians are facing will bring further catastrophic consequences for the different life aspects inside the Gaza territory. It's important to mention that the medical health system inside the Gaza Strip is witnessing such a great deterioration due to the lack of fuel and the lack of water sources. We're talking about different staffs who just are looking exhausted due to their ongoing services, despite the fact that they are working with their limited capabilities and their limited capacities. This hospital is trying to invest as much as possible in terms of the fuel consumption in order to be able to provide further medical services for its patients. And even with the run out of water, it seems that a new catastrophe might really loom if this situation continues.
Well, the Israeli army is massing troops and weaponry at the border with Gaza ahead of its expected ground invasion of the Strip. Charles Stratford is monitoring troop movements for us in Yahini in southern Israel and sends this report.
Israel is preparing to invade Gaza. A week after suffering its worst attack by Palestinian fighters in living memory, the Israeli army is massing heavy weaponry and thousands of troops on the Gaza border. Artillery batteries have been pounding the densely populated Palestinian territory. Airstrikes have completely destroyed entire neighborhoods in Gaza, killing more than 2,000 Palestinians. Hamas fighters continue to fire rockets into Israel. Most are intercepted by Israel's air defense system, known as the Iron Dome. More than 300,000 Israeli army reservists have been mobilized ahead of a possible operation, and morale seems high.
We will win. We will liberate.
Israel's leader says this is just the start.
We are striking at our enemy with unprecedented might. I emphasize, this is just the beginning. Our enemies have only begun paying the price, and I won't detail what is yet to come, but I tell you that this is only the beginning.
This is just a small proportion of a vast Israeli military build-up north of Gaza. Much of the military equipment that we've seen gathering in this area has now moved on to what we suspect could be a more forward operating position in a closed military zone. Since Hamas's surprise military operation against Israel on October the 7th, the Israeli army has struggled to stop more Palestinian gunmen infiltrating from the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military says soldiers went into Gaza on Friday night and retrieved the bodies of several Israelis, believed to be among the estimated 150 people taken captive. Their relatives are demanding the army do more to find out where Hamas is holding other men, women and children to prevent them getting caught in crossfire when an expected ground invasion starts. Charles Stratford, Al Jazeera, Yahini, southern Israel.
Sarah Khairat joins us live now from occupied East Jerusalem. Sarah, what's the situation where you are at the moment?
Well, we've been seeing earlier today, a few hours earlier, some rockets that were fired from Hamas in Gaza towards southern Israel on that border, as well as central Israel, reaching Tel Aviv. Now, we didn't receive any news of any injuries or casualties. There were also an apparent infiltration attempt from Palestinian fighters from Gaza. Again, that seems to have ended. But despite these no casualties, it ended very quickly. This has been happening every day since the Hamas attack took place. Other than that, we're seeing mobilization, as you heard there from Charlie's package of reservists, military men, tanks. And now we're also hearing that this is, according to Israeli media, nothing officially has been confirmed, is that tens of thousands of troops are being lined up to be part of a ground offensive into Gaza. Now, that's still not confirmed, but that's definitely the kind of reports that are circulating around in Israeli media in the last few hours. And that just shows that they are moving, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, into the next phase. When he met up with soldiers earlier on that southern border for the first time, he turned up. It was a show of unity. He's had a very busy week, meeting after meeting. Of course, he also met the US Defense Secretary, as well as the US State Secretary Antony Blinken, where they were discussing the next moves, as well as sharing intelligence. Meanwhile, the US has confirmed that the second aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean is heading towards the east, closer to Israel, as a backup to reinforce, in their own words, the ironclad commitment the US has to protecting Israel and defending it from Hamas and its military wing, Al-Qassam Brigade.
So, Khairat, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Well, the Israeli army is massing troops and weaponry at the border with Gaza ahead of its expected ground invasion of the Strip. Charles Stratford is monitoring troop movements for us in Yahini in southern Israel and sends us this report. Well, we have some technical difficulties with that. We are going to go to a different information now, though, because the war in Gaza is reverberating across the region with cross-border attacks in Israel and southern Lebanon intensifying. Israeli shelling killed at least 2 people on Saturday. Hezbollah fighters have launched further attacks on Israeli positions. Separately, Israeli airstrikes have hit Aleppo's airport in Syria. Ali Hashim has more now from southern Lebanon.
The Israeli army targeted the Aleppo's international airport, and it's now out of service. This comes as a retaliation to the launch of a couple of rockets from Syria towards northern Israel, and that comes also in parallel with an infiltration of a drone, possible infiltration of drone from Lebanon towards Israel that was intercepted by the Israeli air defenses. Now, the 120-kilometer border between Lebanon and Israel has been witnessing mounting tension over the past days. Today, there was an attack by Hezbollah on the Sheba farms. Several Israeli military positions were hit by guided missiles, and the Israeli retaliation led to the death of 2 Lebanese civilians in the town of Sheba. Also, Hezbollah announced that one of its fighters was killed in the crossfire. This is the latest from Lebanon, but it seems that more tension would be coming, especially with the death of civilians. That would mean that maybe tomorrow or the next day there might be also retaliation from the Lebanese side.
Well, Hamas and Iran have agreed to continue cooperation after last week's attack on Israel. Tehran has been the Palestinian group's main supporter for decades and has praised it for its attack. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian met Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Doha on Saturday. The Iranian Foreign Minister has also visited Lebanon, Iraq and Syria as part of a regional tour to discuss the Gaza-Israel war. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is continuing his tour of the Middle East. He hopes to prevent the Gaza conflict from spilling over into a larger war. He's now in the United Arab Emirates after visiting Saudi Arabia. He discussed the situation in Gaza with Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud.
As Israel pursues its legitimate right to defending its people and to trying to assure that this never happens again, it is vitally important that all of us look out for civilians. And we're working together to do exactly that. In particular, working on establishing safe areas in Gaza, working on establishing corridors so that humanitarian assistance can reach people who need it. None of us want to see suffering by civilians on any side, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's anywhere else.
In the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces are increasing the number of raids, arresting dozens of Palestinians. At least 55 people have been killed in the occupied West Bank since last Saturday. Nida Ibrahim reports.
Much of the occupied West Bank has been locked down by Israeli forces in the weeks since Hamas launched its military operation. Palestinians have largely been confined to their homes, and by early Saturday, dozens had been arrested. Most in Hebron, in the south of the occupied West Bank, many of them members of Hamas. In Jericho, 1 Palestinian was killed while taking part in confrontations with Israeli forces near the Aqab al-Jabr refugee camp.
Our children are not different from their fellow Palestinians in the besieged Gaza Strip. Let's consider ourselves there. It's all for the sake of the homeland.
With around 400 prisoners arrested since the start of the escalation, Palestinian families say they're worried about their children in Israeli jails. A father told Al Jazeera that his 17-year-old son was beaten before being arrested.
They attacked him brutally. He's just a child, and they were very violent with him. Someone called us first saying he's dead, but then we were told he's in prison alive. It's worrying.
In the Jenin refugee camp, one of the shortest Israeli raids there concluded without casualties. Israeli forces arrested at least 2 Palestinians, but before the army retreated, armed groups fought back.
Israeli forces have raided the Qalandia refugee camp and arrested Palestinians at a time when the occupied West Bank is under an Israeli blockade. It's almost impossible for people to move from one city to another. Those who try can get killed.
Israeli forces killed a Palestinian and wounded 4 others near Tul Karim in the north of the West Bank late on Friday. Witnesses say their only fault was driving on the street. Palestinians continue to bid farewell to those killed during protests. With around 300 people injured during the demonstrations, a large number of them by live ammunition, this outpouring of grief is only expected to increase. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera, the occupied West Bank.
Well, stay with us here on Al Jazeera as we continue our special coverage, including...
Just as we were driving into Ashkelon, rocket barrage, sirens sounding. A lot of interception today.
The report from southern Israel, which has come under constant rocket fire. And the conflict has triggered thousands of people to take to the streets in many parts of the world. We'll have those details next.
The weather, brought to you by Visit Qatar.
Hello, the weather's somewhat on the change across a good part of North America now. We have got some wetter weather just around the lakes, pushing further east. There's a little area of low pressure. So it's a mobile system. That will make its way over towards the eastern seaboard as we go through the next day. And then we've got some wetter weather also pushing into the Pacific Northwest. The cloud and rain eventually coming in here, western parts of Canada. In between, it's generally dry and settled. A good deal of sunshine. There's that wetter weather around the lakes and wetter weather just pulling away from the eastern seaboard as we go on through Sunday on into Monday. Temperatures in New York at around 16 Celsius. And some of those showers just sliding off the lakes, just pushing down towards the Tennessee Valley. So we'll see some wetter weather coming in here. Fine and dry for the most part behind. Still very hot in LA at around 30 degrees Celsius, but that wetter weather, that will have set in across Western Canada. Washington State, Oregon, northern areas of California, all seeing some rather wet weather from time to time. There's some rather wet weather also affecting parts of Cuba, southern areas of Mexico still.